right, let's talk audio for a second. So in my recent videos, let me just turn the music down. Right, okay, so that's the only thing. Um, so I've been experimenting with the audio a lot. I already made the video with the how to mod or edit audio for your modded cars or something like that. Um, but let's say for the game overall, trying to get the best audio output for the game. And this is what I came across because I have I use a 7.1 uh, surround speaker setup, and I'm actually driving two separate subwoofers along with it. They're well positioned and all the other stuff like that. Um, but I felt that I wasn't. I felt with Automobilista 2 that I wasn't getting the most, particularly with their new audio updates and stuff like that, and improvements in audio sound. Um, all of a sudden, like I felt I wasn't getting the most out of the audio. I felt it was sounding astounding at most of the time. Um, but there were times where I just felt that cars were overall in the pack or something like that coming across vague and things like that. So recently decided to kind of go through the settings one by one, kind of like what I did. I did this with Project Cars 2 as well. But Project Cars 2 is different than auto, even though using the same game engine. Project Cars 2 was more of it was a complete game that had updates. It was a complete AAA game that was released, and then it had updates. Da, da, da. Albalista 2 is actually still being is technically still being worked on. And it's being worked on by a smaller team and things like that. Even though they're improving the engine even further and stuff like that, but it's not as with Project Cars 2. Project Cars 2, almost out of the gate, everything was pretty much equalized from the graphics all the way down to the audio and things like that. I mean, people would argue and say, no, I needed to change this in it, whatever it is, but they had enough people, enough eyes on it, and enough testers, and enough whatever. Um, and also, that was back in the days of, honestly, it's back in the days of AAA games. It's back in the days of, that's 2017, last of the AAA phase of gaming or game production, it seems like. But anyway, so I said, well, they're using the Madness engine, so more than likely they're just not really at that stage yet where they have equalized all that they've put into the game. So this is what I came up with after testing it and testing it and testing it. So uh, let's just start with the play with I'm just going to drop out the player just for our talk here real quick. So I usually had that at 75 now, but the reason why I dropped out is I'll explain. I'm going to start from the bottom. So I'm running in here is my 7.1s. The very first thing that AMS2 has within its audio setup that Project Cars 2 does not have in its setup is the ability to change the audio sampling, which reminds me of uh, uh, RF2, right? Similar thing. So this is important, and I went from it initially ships with it's on max, so that's all cars. But this game runs over 42 cars plus or something like that. Cars can run simultaneously, so it's designed to set up for all of that. But when you're watching your playback and or even driving your car, your perception is not really of all these vehicles as far in the realistic sense. You're only really able to hear like within your immediate cluster, like like two cars ahead, maybe the most. Just think about it as like if you're driving on the highway, how many vehicles do you hear ahead of? And now we're not talking about full blown, no resonator, no muffler vehicles fully blown on a track. But when you're on a highway, with your windows up, let's say, how many vehicles ahead can you hear? How many vehicles behind can you hear? And then I obviously realize it's very low. And if you were standing on the side of the road with the cars going by, how many individual cars would you actually be able to pick up, right? So I thought about that. and I did some testing, and I've actually found out that medium actually gives a better sound quality. Watch this. I found that when it's at max, that so many sounds. Now this is on the seven. That's why I had to say I'm on a 7.1 surround system. So it's splitting up the audio as much as Automobilista will allows to be split across the speakers. But you can still drown out stuff, and you can still make stuff muddy. And so instead of it trying to play the audio of all the vehicles, it's only trying to play the audio of a select amount of vehicles. So it's fewer vehicles, and so the sound is crisper, it's clearer. You don't even Matter of fact, it just sounds crisper and cleaner. It doesn't sound like, oh, I can't hear the other vehicles. It literally just instead of it sound like a drone of vehicles, you actually hear like the Honda popping off and stuff like that. You actually hear but a particular car that's not your car popping off, and or shifting up and shifting down. You hear that car note, and you're like, whoa, I can actually hear that Acura, and it's not even mine. Because we already know with the playbacks and stuff like that, it generally focuses on your vehicle. But to be watching a playback and then you hearing a significant car note of a car that's two car lengths ahead of you or something like that is really, really, really nice, and sounds it comes across really, really natural. So that cleaned up the sound. So Max muddied it up, bringing it down to medium cleaned it up. Putting it to low, really felt isolated. It felt like I was the most I was hearing was one car ahead and one car behind, the most. So medium played out really well. I always have the LFE all the way out, although I don't think that comes across on the recordings. I think that's just like a software thing that where it's output from AMS2, but I don't think it records. I don't know. Either way, but this does work though. This drives the low resonance, right? The low frequencies. So if you have strong subwoofers and stuff like that, it really does work. You really do feel it in your body and stuff like that. So it's important. But if your audio set up wrong, look, I used to do it. I used to turn this off or turn it down because I felt it was muddying up the audio. But as I discovered, well, because the audio was already muddy to begin with, so it was just making it a lot of mud with bass. So putting at the medium, now all of a sudden those notes and the low frequencies really, really, really hit. Wall reflections, I have that all the way up to high. And the reason why I have that all the way up to high is because I'm not using any reverb. I found that the reverb, I used to have it at 100. The reverb muddies up everything, but not in a bad way. So if it's just your one single vehicle and you're ripping on Silverstone or something like that with walls, it sounds amazing. But then soon as you throw in a pack, then all of a sudden all that reverb, blah, 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 then it muddies it up. And I reduce it down. I said, why am I even reducing it down when the new audio in AMS2 and the new audio files and stuff like that have a lot of reverb already built into them. And then the tracks themselves have a lot of reflected sound triggers all throughout the tracks, which of course give you the sense of is reverberating the sound in the virtual sense. In other words, here's a wall, and so it's going to get a secondary echo, blah blah blah, blah like that. So so I realized, wait a minute, then there's no reason to really have the reverb on. So I dropped that out once again, cleared up the audio even further. Pit radio, that's just for nothing. And wind, I put wind at 75. I was running it at 100, but the cars when they went by, I think this used to be under special effects. The cars when they whoosh by, I think that was under special effects. I had it at 100, but when I'm running the TCRs, which everybody knows from my videos, I love TCR racing in general. In the real world, I love it, love it, love it. Have my own modified hatchback because I was so inspired by a lot of the British touring car racing stuff. Um, so when I saw the mods for AMS2, I was totally thrilled. And to me the mods are a lot more playable or a lot more exciting than the original ones written um, uh, for Project Cars 2. They just aim at in AMS2 they just feel a little bit more livelier. But then that also has to do with the audio too, because with the audio, everything feels livelier. But with the wind all the way up at 100, it it all of a sudden the small the small two-door or four-door hatchbacks all of a sudden sound like SUVs whooshing by instead of it being a small hatch. So I dropped it down to 75, and that balanced out really well. Um, Environment, ha ha ha. So I would have had this was at 100 before when I by default, at least when I was using it, and I found with the environment I dropped it all the way down to 5, and it's great because without it, it feels sterile. It feels all you hear is you literally all you hear is cars. It's like you're missing something. But as soon as I bumped up to 5, all of a sudden you get that airy feel. There's like an additional amount of audio without it interfering with the car's audio. Because as soon as I start cranking it up to 50 and 75, it starts to muddy things up. So I kept that 5, and just really most noticeable when the cars are at the starting line, or when the car is has broken away from the pack, and the camera's tracking them, and they're a single vehicle on the road. It just adds enough of the environment audio to it, environment sounds to it, that it doesn't feel like a sterile 3D car running down a virtual straightaway. It feels like a car within a an environment. So for 5, you would be surprised, but yep, 5 you actually hear stuff, which is cool. Um, Collisions at 100, yeah, because uh, I like to I like to know when I hit crap, and it doesn't come across too loud either. Not especially not from the trackside cameras. Um, Track surface volume. So track surface volume are the not the bump stops, but the treads and stuff. I forget what they call them now. Oh my gosh. But sometimes those are too loud when we're rolling over them, right? So at 100, if you're watching in the preview mode, um, then uh, then it's like you hear this very loud sound, um, and it's not. And even though if you watch an actual real world, if you watch like a real world race, or if you've been to a real world race and you've been very close, yeah, you can hear it. But most cases, when you watch it, if you're watching it on some kind of a broadcasted thing, where you got cameras that are using zoom lenses to track cars, whatever it is. So you're not really going to pick up that. You're not going to hear that audio, but it still needs to exist, particularly when you're in cockpit. So there's a trade-off. So it's like, oh, I can just drop that out. But then when you're in the cockpit, you're like, no, I should, not only should I feel that, I should hear that, right? Um, I should hear those strips. So 50 turned out to be a nice compromise where I could hear it in the on a preview from the trackside cameras when the car was close, pretty much, right? Seemed like, and it had a where it was loud enough where I could hear it in the vehicle, but where it was loud enough where I could hear in the vehicle, but soft enough from the exterior sound. That's how best way to put it. Tire volume. So tire volume, uh, that's what that's the audio that I wasn't even thinking about, but that's the audio that grounds the car to to the road or to the track. If you put that to 0, it's like you have yeah, it's like you're playing like a cheap like an old school game. There's no, the car just moving, and there's no audio that tells you it's connected, it's actually grinding or moving on top of a paved surface. And that's what this actually does very well in doing. And I treated it when I tuned this part, I treated it as if though I dropped the audio of the engines out for myself and the opponents, focused only on the track surface, and treated the car as if though it was like an EV, like an electric vehicle with no engine sound, which I have no idea what people like driving EVs in the real world, or even in a sim, but it worked when it came to tuning sound, because by treating it like that, say, hey, well, if this was an EV, how should this? What would I hear? Well, I would hear the tires scrubbing, of course, with that's this section. But I would hear, yeah, the scrubbing, but I would hear the rolling. I would hear the tires rolling throughout the surface and stuff like that. And I should hear that for the whole team of cars coming across. And I found that 50 was a good note for that, a good volume setting for that, as well as for the tires alone. So tires, this is a lot of the tire. This is the tire scrubbing, and when you brake and you screech and you're losing traction on the tarmac, that's all of this, right? And so when it's too high, when it's too high, you'll find in your playback that uh, you can hear your car screeching, even though you can, when you go to a real world race, you can hear them screeching and everything, but it comes across too loud. It's almost like, hey, somebody's putting their brakes on, kind of a thing. So it's too sudden, not too sudden, but too it spikes too high. So putting it at 50, I found is once again is a good compromise. I never would have came up with these. I never would have thought I would have been using these numbers, which is why I said, I need to make a video on this. And so if anybody else is, trying to get the most out of their AMS2 audio, because it's not out of the can. In my Project Cars 2, all my audio is set to 100. I'll make not too many people use Project Cars 2 these days, but all my audio is set to 100, because it's, to me, even though the audio files are not, they're believable to the vehicles, because like the Audis and particularly like the Nissan GTR, that's what a Nissan GTR sounds like. But it doesn't have all that nice reverb built into the audio file itself. And so without that reverb, then it comes across as canned, right? But it is the best, like as far as like surround sound, knowing when the car's to your left, to your right, when it's coming from behind you. It is fully equalized. That whole audio output for Project Cars 2 is fully equalized. So anyway, that's what I mean by, I have it literally, all those settings are just, I just have them all at 100, because that's how balanced out the overall audio is to each other. In other words, like it's clear that they spent a lot of time um, doing that, tweaking that and making sure that, like, hey, if people want to adjust the audio, they can, but it's default setting. Everything's gonna be, well, if you put everything at 100, it's gonna sound gorgeous. So so I never thought I would have came up with this, but anyway, this works. Dropping the reverb, I know everybody wants, like, but reverb is new, and we want to put it to 100 and everything, but you're guaranteed, you're just muddying up all those beautiful car notes, and it's just, once you drop it out, you don't lose the sense of that volume, because as I said before, the audio has a certain amount of reverb in the recording. Now it does in recording, as well as there's with the wall reflections and stuff that exists now. It actually, wall reflections is actually in Project Cars too, but you can't adjust it. It's not adjustable, but it's very subtle. If you listen to your replays from Project Cars 2, you can actually hear it, but it's very, very, very subtle. In other words, like, they equalized it all and try to be as believable as possible. But here we have control over it. But what I'm saying is that dropping that overall, this new tool for reverb, some people, they may need it. It all depends on their audio setup. They may be on, like, headphones or something like that, and they think it's better. So, and that's why I make it clear too. I'm talking about for a 7.1 surround sound system type thing. So anyways, the reverb, that really, really cleaned it up. So there's two, well, this is to review the things that cleaned up or demuddied the audio, was opponent sampling, taking it from max, putting it to medium. That really cleaned it up. Your car won't feel isolated. You'll feel your cluster of cars, and you won't get the sense of, oh, I can't hear that car way down the thing, because you couldn't hear it, or you couldn't hear it before anyway. That's my point. Medium, that cleaned it up. This was the big one, cleaned it up. And dropping the reverb out, oh, that definitely cleaned it up. Dropping the wind down a little bit, that kept it from getting muddy, and dropping the environment down to 5, that cleaned it up. Because when you bring it up higher, it muddies it. It does. Um, and so and so my recent videos, the one I just released the other day, I was running with the audio at 25, at 25. But I just did this recording I'm about to show now with the BMW at Silverstone, and I realized no, the BMW was telling the GT3 was telling me no, 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 my note is a little louder than that. Everything was fine, but it was saying nope, it's a little bit louder than that. So I did some testing, put it at 50, and then I ran the TCRs again at 50, and then I was like, yeah, there it is. That's the right balance. In other words, it sounds 50 sounds good with TCRs, 50 sounds good with the GT3s, um, and so it created that nice balance. So hopefully this helps somebody or anybody who's interested in tuning their audio. So let's take a look at, and in closing, going to play the BMW at Silverstone using these exact settings. All right, thanks.